build something nice over here, you don't care. So that's basically it. They know LA would tolerate certain things other cities wouldn't even accept.
Right.
Okay, so they're realizing they have to come with better projects. I'm having people now actually hold that discussion and say, Bob, here's the front of our building. How's this look? It's like we can give them that input. Whereas before we never even touched design. When I first started with the city, you could never have a discussion of design on a project. That was left to the applicant's architect, and that was it. So there are some big changes. And honestly, before I retire, what we're doing now is probably going to be dwarfed by what we're doing 10 years ago. So we're heading in a definitely good direction. Let me just wind this up with the last type of cases we deal with, the commission and council cases. Those, I wish you guys would, and you probably do, stay on top of those. Those are the cases, as opposed to director cases, which help implement an existing piece of legislation or ordinance. Because we're checking for compliance, we're moving in that direction. You may not always feel we are doing the right thing, but that's our intent with director determinations, to implement existing plans, existing ordinances. The commission council cases, those do the same, but they also go farther. Those, since they're zone changes, plan amendments, new specific plans, those are establishing new policies, new objectives. You really should be involved in those. Give us a lot of feedback on those. We're scrutinizing those much more than we did before. And sometimes we have to tell people, no, the change you want is something that should be addressed community-wide, not on a little level. So really involve yourself with those.
Yeah, I think those requests are kind of a bigger deal, and embedded in that process has more opportunity for public input.
Right.
And they rise to the level of the commission for that reason.
Commission and council. And again, although they make only 4% of our types of cases, they have the biggest impact on your communities. So be really aware of those. And let me just close with in the Valley, what we've seen as far as cases that create interest by the community right now are private school expansions. Okay, a lot of schools were developed way back when, private schools, way back when. They were approved by the CA, very limited conditions at times. They expanded piecemeal sometimes because, who's going to say no to a private school? A little Catholic school comes in, no one says no. Okay. Now those schools have grown, many schools have grown, many more schools have come in. The community's seeing, wait a minute, these have impacts on our community. They need to be addressed. The schools are still in the mindset of, hey, we're just a school. So we're finding ourselves in a position, when they want to expand, we're telling them, you need to apply for a comprehensive master plan conditional use permit. We want to see your entire envelope 10 years out. Again, getting pushback from that, but they understand the community needs to know how this school is going to grow, how it's going to impact you, traffic-wise, noise-wise, aesthetics-wise. So we're seeing more and more school applications come in, and those are quite interesting, Now those we're seeing are density bonus cases. There's a lot of mixed feelings on the appropriateness of density bonus. When they first came in, they caught us all off guard because how do we address this, address the impacts? How much can we push for a better project before we're in violation of state law that allows density bonus? I think we've gotten our feet now pretty well grounded on what our envelope is, and what our authority is, and we're still pushing it a little bit. We're definitely pushing better design on these projects, better integration in the community, because that's what we're hearing the community wants. So we're moving in those directions with the density bonus projects. And you know what? The general multifamily, I think, also is coming up because the economy's turning a bit, so people are building more apartments. And again, those are the ones that haven't been built for a while. So as they're coming in, the builders are saying, "What, design? What are you talking about? Open space? What are you talking about? Guest parking? What are you talking about? Oh, active open space versus, the side yard, and that's it." So, let me tell you, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's eye-opening. But again, we tell them, look, if you do this, the community is going to welcome your project, or at least not think you're a carpetbagger, and they'll, come along with you. But it's a learning curve for the industry. So with that, I'm going to close it. Well, I think we want to go through Shauna's presentation.
We're going to do questions a little after her presentation.
Oh, okay.
So let me turn it over to Shauna, and then I guess we can take some Q&A.
Sounds good. All right, yes, as mentioned before, I'm Shauna Bonston, Senior City Planner. for the metro area, and by metro we also mean south and west. I'm scooting over for the camera. So I've been with the department for about 11 or 12 years now. I recognize many friendly faces from my time on the west side. I worked at West Coastal for a number of years when reorg, when we kind of did both policy and implementation. So this is just, I know you guys know how it's formatted, but I think it always helps when we're talking about individual sections to kind of see where they fall within the department. Our department's divided into 3 sections. We have policy, planning, and code studies, and with that is also historic preservation. We have case processing, which is we're a component of that. And of course, we have really kind of a support component, which is administrative systems, our GIS, mapping. That's more about providing information and on our computer programs to do research on the cases. We have PCTS, which we use to track cases, and you guys end up getting information from that. So as part of case processing, as Bob mentioned, so we have the code which dictates who the authority is for the decision. So we have the Office of Zoning Administration, and as a component of that, Development Services Center. That's a nicer name for the counter. So the counter, obviously, we work in conjunction with, because that's where our cases are filed. That's where applicants will always go to figure out, to planning clearance. They'll work with building and safety. As Bob mentioned, about 20% of the projects, we see about 20% of the total projects that get approval through building and safety. So as plan implementation, this is us, neighborhood projects. You already had a presentation from major projects. We also have expediting and subdivisions. So we're kind of your meat and potatoes, I would say, of the department. I think you talked the other day about what major projects this consists of, and I was thinking major projects is like your gala gown. We're kind of like what you wear to work. It kind of like, it's what you are going to see on a daily basis in the neighborhood. And in a way, it kind of more accurately speaks to the style that you would convey in your day-to-day life. Next slide. So we implement policies, as mentioned before, that range from the framework to community plans. We do project review in overlay areas such as specific plans, CDOs, NODs, acronym crazy. But basically, these are a variety of special overlay districts that have been previously approved through a policy process to determine what unique values they wanted in the neighborhood, what problems they were trying to solve, or what kind of projects they would want to incentivize. So we see all projects that get reviewed in those special geographic areas. As I mentioned, there are 49 in my geographic areas. We also have certain requests for the code, and then we process a wide range of types of projects. One thing I wanted to mention, I held up my code. This I acquired just a couple days ago. This is the zoning code from 1966. That's so much easier to carry. But what this doesn't include is anything that Bob and I are currently in charge of. This talks about the zoning administrator's rule, and it talks about 4 different types of overlay districts, including oil, animal slaughtering, and like gravel. So we've come quite a ways in what we're looking to implement in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. I think so. Our sections really have an emphasis on the geographic expertise. So the way that we're divided in our sections, for us, I have city planners in each of the west, coastal, east, south, and central areas, and they oversee a unit, and they supervise associates and assistants, which are each assigned to certain geographies and take on cases. So to that end, we end up being kind of the front line. We receive a lot of the calls when people kind of just don't know where to go. They live in a neighborhood and they have some questions. We end up taking a lot of those first calls, and we might direct them to our policy colleagues if it's a long-range policy project that they're concerned about, or they want to see something change in the future. So that's kind of one service that we provide. Bob and I also serve as the senior city planners that represent area planning commissions. So I attend sometimes twice a month both the Harbor and the West Area Planning Commission, and I represent the director there giving updates. I also wait to see if there are any public comments, and I might take some notes down and get back to the commissions at a later date. So that's one of our tasks as well. Next slide, please. So Bob and I talked about the desire to kind of explain to you a little bit about the process. And I know you were going to talk about commission cases. This may be too detailed, but maybe it's worth kind of seeing all the steps that are involved. So I know sometimes people will apply for a case and it just seems like it's gone into the deep end and they might not hear back for a while. There's a lot of administrative steps in that process. So one thing that I wanted to focus is on PIR cases. In this case, it's a specific plan project permit compliance, which is a very long way to say. Basically reviewing for compliance with a specific plan. Again, this is only one type of many cases that we see. But just so you get a sense, commonly applicants will come to us, they might consult with the PID planner in advance. So we will, and in fact we appreciate seeing and we are moving towards insisting seeing applications come in very early on before someone's actually applied or gotten all the design established. We want to see kind of what they have in mind, so we can help direct them towards the correct application. We can give them a heads up about our urban design requirements and other requirements so that we get a better quality project. Once they've met with our plan implementation planner, let me back up a second. So we use this term plan implementation, which is like jargon, but really we also use case processing. I actually think project review is a better way of putting it because there's an administrative component to the processing, but I really think the value added that we serve as maintaining this process and having this review is really important. So after the consultation with the planner, the applicant will prepare the application materials. So for each of the types of requests that they would have, there are laid out materials that they're required to submit. So usually there's elevations and site plans, but also an application form. They'll have to often submit draft findings, and that the findings are the justification for why they should be granted whatever they're requesting. So with each of the applications, again, there's a series of requirements. So that they have to prepare that information. They file it at the counter, the Development Services Center. They pay the fees, and then it's allocated back to us. The materials are forwarded to the planner. We review the materials, and then, as Bob talked about, the environmental process. So the environmental review is conducted if it's applicable for doing an MND or an EIR. A categorical exemption will be given at the counter if it meets that threshold. Once the environmental is complete, we do a project analysis. We write a determination letter, which I'm sure you guys have seen. Those are our kind of formal letters that speak to either approval or disapproval. We give, if it's approval, we give conditions, meaning you must do this in order to satisfy our requirements, and then a series of findings, which is kind of the legalese that describes why they're justified. Of course, we have an appeal period, and assuming you get approved, you then go to the counter to get the clearance. Next slide, please. So if you get an appeal, you kind of stack on an additional few steps. So if an appeal is filed, and again, each of the different types of entitlements will dictate who can actually appeal. Like with density bonus cases, there's a more limited, I think it's just adjacent neighbors that can appeal. With other types of projects, it might just be anyone in the community. So you've got a 2-week appeal period usually. If it's appealed, the staff will then write an appeal report. So usually we kind of back up our previous decision. Sometimes it's appealed by members of the public or neighbors, and sometimes it's appealed by the applicant because they didn't appreciate whatever we determined. So we'll draft an appeal report, and then we'll have a hearing for the specific plan project permit compliance that would go to the Area Planning Commission, who would hear both sides. And part of our staff report would include points to the appeal. So then the decision report would be issued based on what the Area Planning Commission said, and then again, clearances at the counter. Next. And so this is back to that kind of standard process for project permit compliance. Next. I just was adding in, here's a fun component, when we have DRBs, which are design review boards, this is an added area for community input. So this would be the exact same process, except somewhere in here, we've got a series 1 or more design review board meetings, where the design review board will take a look at the project, hold a public meeting out in the community on regular scheduled meetings to help bring a better quality project. Next. The other thing with the DRB is that they'll often file for preliminary review. So you actually have to do the first phase of it, and then you start over again. So there's those projects in those areas, and we don't have a ton, a few. Westwood, I think, is one that I can think of. You have Mulholland is another big one. So those are very attentive communities that the projects really get a lot of review. Next. So just in summary, our emphasis in our sections, more and more is on urban design. We have those, the citywide urban design, which I worked on, and those are really good for areas that don't have existing overlays or don't speak to other kind of design elements. And then, of course, the community participation. We kind of talked about the different ways that the community can get engaged, and it does vary with the types of entitlements. And I think that's it.
Tell them about the fair. You got to talk about the Fairfax Theater.
Oh, this was, okay, I threw this up as a good example of, this is a Fairfax Theater. This is kind of a project that is a great example of an applicant working really diligently in the community. I think they held, I want to say like 60 public outreach meetings that they did on their own. And this is something that we say to applicants when you come in. Your best bet is getting out there, going to the neighborhood council, really showing the community what you're going to do, because the worst thing for us is when we can't anticipate and we're not sure what people think about it, and it kind of blows up in these public meetings. We want applicants to go out there and get early feedback to really redesign their project based on the community input. This is a terrific example of them doing that. So by the time that we took them to commission, everyone was like, great, this is terrific. You've got an existing building which was not deemed historic, but was critical to the kind of fabric of the neighborhood. So they maintained the existing Fairfax Theater and then built around it, had a mixed-use project,
So the billboard.
Remove the billboard, exactly. So this was, so this was a great example, again, of upfront, early on community input that really helped us through the process. And so these are the types of projects that we see. You were mentioning types of stuff that we're seeing lately. Probably most active for me is downtown and Hollywood, and we're just seeing a ton of mixed-use projects. We also see a lot of projects that, as Bob mentioned, might have started a number of years ago, and then the economy kind of tanked for a while. So we have developers coming back wanting to do newer versions of previous approvals. We're seeing a lot of that. Sorry about that. And we see a wide range of projects that can be anywhere from simple signs or facade changes to full-scale, full-block mixed-use projects or towers. It really runs the gamut. And with that, I'm basically concluding. I know that Heidi is passing out my presentation.
We're going to go around the room really quickly and introduce everybody, and then so hang on to your questions really quick, because we're going to go into Q&A for a few minutes. And we'll start in the back room over there. If you could name your neighborhood council or your community that you represent, and also if you could let us know how you found out about today's meeting.
Hi. We came together. This is Jorge Garcia, my husband. I'm Lori Garcia. Both of them are residents in Sereno. And I believe Jorge signed up for the early notification.
Great. All right. And August?
August Sawyer, Woodland Hills Warner Center, neighborhood council. Got the email.
Teresa Marcus from Boyle Heights. I actually was called by Cindy to come here. And thank you very much, Cindy, because this has been very interesting.
Okay. Next.
Larry Lacombe, I'm a stakeholder in the Silver Lake Triangle, and of course our neighborhood council at Silver Lake. I found out about it because of our two talks, Jeff and John, that will introduce themselves.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wayne, Silver Lake concerned resident, and I found out about it on PlanCheckNC.
I'm John Lee. I'm a stakeholder in Silver Lake. There's a project directly across the street from us that we think is out of scale, so that's why we've jumped on this project pretty early, and the neighborhood council has been pretty good about directing us. So thanks for having us.
Ashley Atkinson with the Rock Neighborhood Council, and I got an email. I get all your emails.
I'm David Green, also with the Rock Neighborhood Council. We got your email. We also got an email from the Highland Park Neighborhood Council yesterday, which kind of interpreted the original email.
Maria?
I'm Maria Fiscom, Valley South Neighborhood Council, both Valley Residents Group. Got the email and just keep up with the website.
Russ Brown, downtown with downtown living with consulting. For 5 years now.
Sharon Cummings, Mar Vista Community Council steering committee. Sergio Carmel, Sun Valley Neighborhood Council.
Clay McFarland, Vice President of the Balboa Neighborhood Council. I would like to offer service.
Michael Garrett with the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council.
Barry Agus from the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council. I'm pretty much already over here now.
Hello, Frank Wada, Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council. Received an email.
I'm Sarah Ramsawak from the North Hollywood Northeast Neighborhood Council. I'm Secretary and Land Use Chair. I get the emails from various people, and I also found the PlanCheck website, and I signed up for their notices, so I should get at least 2 notices each month.
Robert Guevara, Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council, formerly and now stakeholder, and a lot of email comes in, and I checked as the second Saturday, so we're here.
Bob Peppermiller, Midtown North Hollywood, email.
Ron Cross, North Hollywood Northeast Neighborhood Council, board member, email.
Glenn Bailey, Encino Neighborhood Council, email.
Stephen Box, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
Ed Hunt, President of the 4,600 resident Melrose Hill Neighborhood Association in Hollywood.
Barbara Ringett, Silver Lake Neighborhood Council, emails.
Tony Wilkinson, Panorama City, and all of the developers and projects you don't like, please send to Panorama City. We need developers.
Careful what you wish for.
Nina Royal, Treasurer, Land Use Committee, STNC, and Steering Committee. I'm Marlene Savage, First Vice Chair of Mid-City West, and on the Steering Committee, PlanCheck.
And I'm with the San Montague Neighborhood Council, Cindy Clegg-Martin. So we're going to go into Q&A. Ed, I think you were first. And let me know who else wants to ask questions. Okay, we'll go back this way.
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay.
You mentioned the 3-hour training for design guidelines, and when do we get our 3-hour training?
You know, Simon and I have talked about that, and there's a whole series. Once we get through the entire staff, we'd like to come back to the neighborhood council. We'd actually like to have an in-house training for all of the planning deputies for each of the council offices. And so there's a number of supplemental trainings that we'd like to bring, but it's nice. It's a package thing. It's a PowerPoint. It really provides a lot of the history and context of how we've evolved, and I think it would be beneficial for this group. Okay. I think that you received some sort of overview of the guidelines as they were going through the process, and really they still are going through the process. We don't have full city council approval for an implementing ordinance quite yet, so we're working through that. But the design guidelines are in place. They are available. I believe they're on our website, but we can come back and do a training.
Sure. Glenn?
I know that of the 35 community plans, I can't speak for the whole city, but at least for the ones in the valley, it seems like they haven't changed the boundaries for at least 40 years. And my question is that now that we have neighborhood councils looking at, organizing themselves largely about planning and land use issues, I'm aware of several plans where either the community names have changed or the neighborhood council boundaries. So within a half-mile, probably variation between those community boundaries where the community plans don't correspond. And so I know you're going through slowly the updates on the community plans, but I'm wondering if you're could look at an adjustment on those boundaries to realign them with the community boundaries in some cases. Like in the valley, we have different community names, as you know, and also keeping in mind the neighborhood council boundaries. And if you want some specifics, I can mention it.
I think I've heard the specifics. When those community plans were developed, I think it was Con Howe, way back when, even before then. I think they were using more geographic boundaries, freeways, major highways, things like that. Those issues, well, can they be relooked at? Honestly, I couldn't tell you how we would go about changing the community plan boundary, maybe.
Yeah,
Lisa?
well, this has come up. This isn't the first time I've heard this in the last few months. This is something that maybe I can raise and see where we're at with the managers in the policy side of our planning family. But I would imagine we'd be able to explore that. We would have the ability to adjust boundaries on a going forward basis with new community plans, if that was the will of the neighborhood councils and the council members involved. So something worth exploring. I'm just not sure where we're at and what has to change to facilitate that. But that's something we can get back to you on.
Yeah,
at a
could
future
you
meeting.
find out who we contact, who would be in touch with?
Okay.
Thanks.
So Mr. Peppermill next, and then we'll go to.
Okay, early notification system. One came down the pipe in our neighborhood involving a density bonus and environmental. I tried to drill down on the case numbers, but got nowhere. I mean, how can I find out more detail?
What happened? Okay, I passed out for the valley. You'll see this sheet of paper. This will list all the community plans, all the specific plans, and the name of the planner assigned to it, and the phone number. And then it goes to their supervisor and then mine. If you can't get anything on the computer, just call up the planner for that community plan area. They'll get you that information. When it comes in over the counter, they input it into the computers. How it gets filtered through the rest of the servers, I can't tell you, but I can tell you it's not perfect. So you may be running into a roadblock if you try to do it electronically. I'd say just hop on the phone, call these people or myself, and as long as you have the case number,
yeah, I have
that. As long as you have the case number, we'll be able to help you. Not a problem.
Okay, Sarah?
Oh, I have 3 unchallenging questions. And so first of all, it's to you, Mr. Duenas. You said the plan check code is, am I correct, it's that black book?
The big black book.
That's the big black book.
This is our municipal code, the zoning section of our municipal.
Right.
All right, now my second unchallenging question was, what kind, you were saying that you needed to have more response from the neighborhood councils when you send out ENS reports. What kind of response do you want from us?
What kind? Well,
what are you looking for?
Honestly, I'm just looking for any kind of input because sometimes, hypothetically, density bonus case comes in. Obviously, somebody's going to put more units than would be permitted. What do you think of this? Is the scale of their project, appearance, appropriate for the area? Access, is that appropriate for the area? Look at their plan overall. Does it fit? And again, this may lead more into the design aspect, but I'm looking for anything that you may have a concern about.
So our land use committee is right now having the opportunity to have a presentation by an architect on a particular spot on the corner of Strathern and Laurel Canyon.
Okay.
Now, this is the first time that we have gotten an ENS. It's the first time we've had the opportunity to speak to the architect. When we have this meeting, a committee meeting on Monday night, are you looking for some sort of response from us at that level or after the regular board meeting level?
Honestly, as early as you want to give it to us, the earlier the better. We just had a Ralph's store coming in. They wanted that neighborhood council to give them a letter of approval even before they filed their application with us. Normally what we want to see is a developer comes to you or a builder comes to you and says, this is what I'm proposing, because we direct people to go to you first, even before they file, because we want them to refine their project to address your issues, so when they give it to us, hopefully they've taken your input and put it into their design. So
now,
when we get it.
This is where my question comes in. We're having a committee meeting on Monday night. On Thursday night, we should, in the committee, form a resolution or a recommendation to give to the board meeting on Thursday night. And on Tuesday of the following week is the public hearing at Brownie Center in Van Nuys.
Okay, that's probably a problem with the applicant not going to you early enough. There's no ordinance that says these applicants even have to come to the neighborhood council. We encourage them to go as early as possible so you can give them their feedback, they incorporate it, and even before the hearing, they've put it into their design. At that point though, say the hearing's on the next day, just write up your letter. Again, it's going to be about 30 days at least before we get a planning commission report to the planning commission. Give us your input at that point.
Okay, we're going to go to the next.
As long as you give it to us, that's what we're really concerned with.
So I think we acknowledge that this scenario you're laying out, it's a little compressed. I would say that's not ideal.
No, it's not.
That is not
I'm
ideal.
almost panicked
What
about
we
it.
would prefer is maybe to have a good month before our staff hearing.
Okay, my fear is what if we do not vote to recommend this? Can I talk to you privately
Yeah,
about
let me
it?
do that after, but
I've got business questions. We'll talk later.
we've got some more questions, and
Very quickly, something that is useful when you're having your land use committee meeting, especially if the hearing date is so close, you could send the planner that's in charge of that project minutes of your meeting. And just say, you know what, we're going to meet again, and they'll send you those minutes afterwards. So you're asking what to do. Send us your minutes. You don't, I mean, if it's going to take time to get together language for a resolution, to make it pretty and put it on a cover letter, you know, you could send us the minutes so that we're aware of what went on in the discussion, what kind of questions you got, blah, blah, blah. You know, and then on Thursday, we could talk more. But it's helpful to send us your minutes if you don't have like a fancy resolution to give us. You could give us a copy of your minutes.
so I'm trying to get around the room. So this gentleman right here is next, and then I'm going to go back left, and then I'm going to go right again. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Duenas, you mentioned that in the case of a MND, that a traffic study is needed. Who does a traffic study?
Okay, what happens, a case comes in, we start doing the initial study, we come down to the traffic impact portion, our staff will look at it, and just by looking at the project, we know, hey, this one potentially can be a red flag. We'll send the applicant, or send a request. The acronym is ISAF, I forgot what ISAF stands for, but basically we're direct to the applicant, we go to DOT, have DOT crunch some numbers on various intersections, look at your project to see if you're going to generate enough traffic that you could potentially have an impact in the area. If they say yes, it's a little form, if they just check off yes, boom, traffic study is required. Then what happens is the project's put on hold, we can't move forward with it, because we need that report. The applicant sits down with DOT. They sit down and have like a little scoping session and say, your project's located here. DOT tells them, these intersections, and not just the ones right next to you, these intersections over here in your community are at a level F. I don't know if you're familiar with the levels of service the street has, but these are the ones that are really congested out here. And they could be like a half mile away, 5 blocks away. They tell them, we want you to look at that intersection, this intersection, this intersection, and this intersection. Look at how the traffic flow from your project is going to disperse itself. What impact are those intersections going to have? Come back to us with recommendations on how to mitigate those impacts to a level of insignificance. Okay, it's DOT basically telling them what they have to study. They study it, they hire a traffic engineer, they study it, the traffic report has to go back to DOT and signed off and approved that it was done properly, for the best practices, and that it did come up with acceptable mitigation measures. If it's accepted by DOT, they sign it off, give it back to the applicant, send us a copy. We then take it as their recommendation and continue our environmental analysis.
So you take the builder's word for it?
No, we take DOT's approved traffic study. The builder and his consultant, and I've seen wild traffic studies. Okay.
Yeah.
When they send them over to DOT, DOT then evaluates them to their standards. If it cuts mustard, they'll sign it off. That's what we use. And honestly, it's still a recommendation. I've had traffic studies signed off by DOT come to me. I've looked at it and I've rejected it. And I've gone back and told DOT, I'm not accepting this and this and this because that's just a little too far-fetched. So that's the way the traffic studies work.
Thank you.
Okay, this gentleman there.
I wanted to ask you sort of a general question, and maybe it's more along the lines of just a little more narrative about plans that are by right, proposals that are by right, and the second thing is on specific plans, which we've got some detail on here. How much of your territory is covered by specific plans?
I wish I would brought the specific
Yeah,
plan
we have
now.
a good map.
But
Can you go back to a map?
do we have I would say, in a nutshell, not much. is covered by specific plans.
Well, geographically, yes, actually.
Oh,
I would say like
oh.
almost half the geography, because some of them.
Well, I'm looking at the valley.
Yeah.
For the valley, not much. Major corridors, definitely all of Mulholland is covered with a specific plan. The length of Ventura Boulevard is covered with a specific plan. We've got the Warner Center specific plan. We've got a few other CDOs in the area, but not a lot.
Tujunga has a specific
Yes,
plan?
yes. But I would say not a lot.
Yeah.
It's areas where the city council and the community has felt we need more regulations or more controls than a code can give us. So.
And then the by right?
The by right is the bulk of stuff. And again, 90% of the permits issued, 80% of the permits issued in the city are by right. 20% come through us.
And by right means it goes to building and safety. And
Good
it
plan,
means
Jeff.
it's not in a special geography, and they're not asking for relief or anything special from the code. They're just meeting the code, and they're not in a special area.
They're
Those are by
following
right.
all of the rules.
So in a change of use, for example, they've got some things that they need adjustment on, they have waivers that they request. That wouldn't be considered by right, although some of those items in their application may be by right as a whole.
The little waivers, say they want, a little waiver. Sometimes it could be a director's determination. It's not in a specific plan, but that's a discretionary action that in the other areas we get to review.
So if it's discretionary, it's not by right.
Correct. Discretionary means it's the director's discretion as to whether it's appropriate based on the code and meeting regulations.
We have the ability to say yes or no. If it's by right and they meet every aspect of the code, we really don't have the authority to say no or to impose additional conditions, mitigations, design elements to that project because they are by right. It really ties our hands.
And director's discretion can also be helped a great deal by neighborhood council.
Yes.
Okay, this lady right back here.
Yes, in Boyle Heights, we had, as the chair for the planning committee for Boyle Heights, we have one of the largest projects. It's called Wangerwood. And we've had major issues, not with the developer, not with the city, but actually we were threatened by some of the people, a group of people that are against the development. And
do you have a question?
My question is, since the flood committee passed it, we went ahead and passed it, we heard the motion and the whole thing, then the general board refused to even listen to the project because of the threats. Can the flood committee decision have any impact on Plum?
Are you talking about Plum for your neighborhood council or Plum for the city?
Plum for the city.
I would say, and I'm actually working on that Wyvernwood project, so I'm very familiar with that. And that's one of those big ticket major projects that Shauna and Bob fortunately don't have to worry about. But I would say that any communication from any level of your decision making would be helpful. Would be help. We're actually expected to have our first CPC hearing on Wyvernwood later this month on Thursday, May 30th. And so any kind of written communication that the staff planners can receive to help advise our recommendation report is of value to us.
Okay, now that is just one more question. That communication, does it come from the flood committee and the neighborhood council, or does it come from the president and general board? Because the general board doesn't want to deal with it.
That's up to your neighborhood council.
I would say that's at your discretion. I mean, we receive input from individual members, from neighborhood councils, from clubs. Anybody who wishes to comment on a project has the ability to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, I already did present our...
Okay, next, this gentleman here.
Hi, thanks for doing this presentation today. We are involved in a project that's across the street from us, and we've been working with Vanessa Soto, she's an extremely professional, epitome of a great city employee, so thank you for her. The question I have is really about, in terms of the projects that come to the zoning office, how many of these request alcohol in a neighborhood that's predominantly residential, and typically how does that get perceived by the zoning office, and what are the typical outcomes?
So, alcohol requests are dealt with by the Office of Zoning Administration. I don't know what the percentage is. I would say just anecdotally, we get a lot of requests.
We get a lot of requests.
Right.
Sure we do.
And they're looking at making sure there isn't an impact to the area. I'm sure that we also get a lot of requests for residential. They're looking to not have over concentration of alcohol. And I know that they can be controversial.
Yeah, well, in the CUB application by the applicant in a specific instance, they do say that in our census tract, it's already oversaturated according to ABC standards. The problem is that it's in a commercial, on a commercial block, but across the street, it's a residential area, and actually the residents are all around. So, this is the issue that we're dealing with. But in that instance, is that something that the city thinks is as reasonable?
Well,
no, I will say in the development of the staff report and in the analysis that takes place, the staff planners will go out and actually look at the neighborhood, look at the site. The way that it works in the Office of Zoning Administration is you have zoning administrators really almost functioning as a judge. And so these assistant planners are almost like working as their clerks. And they will go out, they will take photographs, they will walk the site, they will walk the neighborhood, they will do research, they will look at related cases, they will look at past cases, they will do outreach to LAPD to see if there's any crime statistics or some sort of issue that's happening in that particular area. All of that is developed into a staff report that goes before the zoning administrator for their consideration. And then, of course, a hearing is held where all of your input is received by that zoning administrator.
Right. Just a follow-up question to that. So we've spoken with a business owner in the area who's worked with the same permit expediter that's on this project. And that person has informed us that this permit expediter has a relationship with Franklin Acevedo, who is the head of the APC. So even if we do go to an appeal, because of that existing relationship, we feel like there's a conflict of interest. And also, this business person, unrelated to this project, was told that typically when there's an appeal against an alcohol license, for example, usually if you wait 6 months, it gets to the APC, and then Franklin Acevedo will sign off on it because the way to justify it is that it brings income into the city. So this is kind of the situation that we find ourselves in. We have our hands tied.
I think that this might be a topic
that
for
might
another
be a side conversation that we can have. Yeah.
So we're going to go to this gentleman back here, and then Maria.
Okay. We're from Eagle Rock, and I have a simple specific plan question, a complicated one. The simple one is we have the Colorado Boulevard specific plan.
Yes.
And my question is, where do exemptions to the specific plan hit the NC system, or do they, or not, or do they never? Meaning, someone wants an exemption to the plan, does it show up with a case number, and
yes.
it comes to the land use chair, and that's just something we can weigh in as if it were any other
exemption.
building thing?
Am I misunderstanding the question?
I think your question is, a person comes to the counter, and somebody makes a determination that this project is not governed by the specific plan?
No, someone makes a determination that it is governed by the specific plan, and they would like an exemption.
I think you mean an exception, which is to say that they're in a specific plan area, and they're saying, we can't meet the specific plan regulations, so we're going to ask. We don't want to, yes. Then that comes to us as a specific plan exception case, and that goes to the Area Planning Commission for approval. And you should be getting it because it's a case number.
So it's a case number, it shows
absolutely.
up in the early notification report.
Yeah.
Fine. Second question is, we've got the Colorado Boulevard specific plan, and we've got a design review board.
Yes.
And we've got a design review board that's not really familiar with the specific plan, and we've got business owners in town who don't adhere to the specific plan, and we've got lots of people in town who would like to change the specific plan.
Oh.
But there are roadblocks to all three of those problems. We've been told that there's no staff for enforcement, reported as regular code enforcement.
Yeah.
And then the two sign guys, the lead guys, one side of town, one side of town. And then we say, well, what about amending it? It's 20 years old. We have amendments we like, and we're told, well, we need to come up with $100,000 to pay for planning anyway to amend it. We can't amend it. So then the business owners hear that, and then they just ignore it. and send it by email.
Okay.
That's a terrific case example of some things we're working
So my
on.
question
Yeah.
is there someone from your department who can come to town and have a town hall meeting and answer these questions that everyone has?
They have questions about the specific plan?
The 3 questions I just gave you are questions everyone has.
Why don't we talk offline about that? Because I see you guys are
It actually might be a good topic because we also have that same scenario up in Sonoma.
But I mean, I think you touched on, the enforcement is a big issue, and we, just like you, we go on the building and safety website, and we will, that's the best bet at getting enforcement is marking down really specifics if someone's not meeting it. The other issue is that we do have specific plans that are outdated, for sure, and I think we, continue to struggle with implementing them as times change. So let's talk offline.
And that's a citywide request. Everyone would like these specific plans in their communities updated, but the resources sometimes aren't there.
Yeah, so it's something that we, neighborhood councils across the city or communities across the city, we should work on because you're not the only community with the issue. Okay, I know some folks are asking 2 questions or multiple questions, so please ask your multiple questions first up, and Maria's next.
Okay, I don't mean to repeat what everybody's saying, but we also have a specific plan in Notting Hill. Ours is currently being updated, so that's a good thing. How do we help you when somebody comes with a prohibited use to your counter and somehow it gets approved? Is this a side conversation?
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I know which one. So we can talk offline on that one.
Okay.
All right. Did I have any questions in this group here? Otherwise, I'm coming up to Tony. Okay. Tony.
This is a time frame with respect to the 75-day requirement. And we realize that there's something like a traffic study that sort of puts it on hold.
Yes.
But in theory, it's like from the time they're at the counter to the time somebody makes a determination?
Well, it's about somewhere after the environmental.
What will happen is...
And that was my specific question is the timeline for the environmental and how that figures in to the 75 days and when we could get notice of the environmental.
Think of the environmental and the entitlement request as 2 applications that have an unholy bond. The person comes to the counter, files both cases. Obviously, we can't act on the entitlement until the environmental is done. The decision maker needs a complete environmental analysis to do. But say that environmental analysis takes a lot of time, 2 months, 3 months. If it's not fair and it's not intended to bite into the 75 days of that first entitlement case. So the entitlement case itself, that 75 days, does not start until the environmental clearance is complete. Okay, so first we have to get the completed environmental. We go through however long it takes to get. Once we've got a published environmental, then the following day, that starts the clock on that other entitlement, the 75 days. So they don't overlap, those have to go one after the other. So you're not being shortchanged.
And just to be clear, if it's got a case number, that means there is a discretionary action, and that means it should be on the planning report, including director.
Correct.
There should be on the planning report to the neighborhood council.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
In Silver Lake, an applicant has applied for a variance to change a residence to commercial. There is no conformance with zoning, general plan, or a specific plan, and nothing like it in the entire community, the entire 500 feet and beyond. Is there such a thing as a spot variance? Is it legal? And the second part is the applicant is co-chair of the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council, and given allegiance to him and total misrepresentations by his consultant, apparently approved by him. Also, he's politically connected. Will the zoning administrator, the planning department, well, first the planning department, then the zoning administrator, and the area commission be influenced by the politics of this, or will our neighborhood's 100% residential community remain intact as residential?
That's when we start to talk about cases. They have their authority, they have their realm. They also have findings that have to be made.
Right.
Now, let me talk, in an ideal world, a decision maker will look at those findings, and everyone could agree this project meets it or doesn't meet it.
Based
Okay.
on the findings.
Based on the findings and the analysis and the pictures and everything else in a perfect world. But in reality, everyone chimes in with their opinion. Everything is subjective. What is compatible to you may not be compatible to you. You know, sandstone number 3 is brown number 4 to you. Those little things all get meshed into the decision-making process. The zoning administrator then has to take all that and make a determination.
But what the zoning administrator is, what is irrelevant to us is the politics and the relationships, because that really has nothing to do with this code and those findings that we need to make.
Right.
And so that may matter when you get up through the plum and council processes, but at that staff level and at the zoning administrator level, who's really functioning as a judge, those things are irrelevant to us.
We listen to it, but it shouldn't.
It doesn't influence the decisions or the recommendations.
Yeah. The findings are legal, so we have to make sure that whatever we're writing or defending or analyzing, that it's defensible in court. So we can't just say, oh yeah, because we got a phone call. We need to go back to the code and make those findings. Right. Really.
Yeah.
So.
That would really affect the integrity of our process.
So is there anybody who didn't ask a question yet? Because I know this gentleman wants to ask a question, and I have a couple of questions. Go ahead.
This won't be an outside question. I just wanted to know your perspective on grandfathering. This particular project, they're trying to grandfather in parking, although it's a change of use. So, and then I've read somewhere online that grandfathering is kind of this buzzword that a lot of people like to throw around. What is grandfathering, and what is your perspective on it?
I think grandfathering basically is, if it was legally built at the time, all the rules that were in play at the time, and they haven't changed it today, even if the rules have changed today, that use is typically grandfathered in. But again, legally built, no changes, no nothing. The parking issue comes in a lot. People want to grandfather in their parking. Right. And we typically tell them, look, the parking's grandfathered in, as long as the use that's applied to it, and the activities and everything, and the footage, all is relatively the same. Right.
Building and safety does a calculation based on the previous use and what was entitled to them, and what the new use is, and what the change may be in the parking requirement.
And if they change that use, that lower parking standard, say from retail to restaurant, that lower parking standard is not grandfathered in. That doesn't. But people do throw that word around. They always throw that word around. Illegal construction or developments or uses that were established illegally, those typically are not grandfathered in. It has to have been legally established.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Just a couple of things. Two things that I got really strongly out of today is the importance for us to respond and communicate with the planning department as early as possible whenever we hear of something that you're going to be doing a director's determination on. Is that right?
Yes, although I would also say you guys can prioritize. You don't have to come on everything, right? Don't feel obligated to do everything, but you guys will prioritize what is most important to you.
Right, but if neighborhood councils, I mean, we asked to receive these early notification. And so as early as possible when something hits, whether it's by just getting the word out to our communities and letting people know that this is in the pipeline, we haven't seen the detail. If you have an interest in this, start to comment about it, and here's where you can send your comments in, whether they go directly to you or through the neighborhood council. And you're strongly encouraging. That way it helps you because you're responding or you're determining on behalf of Mr. LeGrand, so you want the feedback. This is helpful to you. Yeah, right?
We want it before the appeal period.
Right.
And also, in those situations where the developer hasn't come to you, and some of them don't, we need that feedback, say, from you, so we can then, and we often do, we tell the applicant, look, we're reviewing your case, but we're getting whispered in our ear by neighborhood councils, by the community, they're feeling this. Do you want to look at your project again before we issue a determination? Or maybe now, buddy, that we've gotten all this feedback, they really want to see your project. And they'll ask, okay, can you put it on hold? I'm going to the neighborhood council. It'll encourage them.
Please keep in mind that when everybody submits an entitlement, they have to send the neighborhood council a packet with the renderings and with just a snapshot of what they're going to be doing in that property. So When you get the early notification report, you can always call me if you don't know how to contact the planner, and I'll contact you with that planner. So you could first find out what that case number is about, and then you could decide like, hey, you know what, this is really our top priority, and we need to figure stuff out, and we need the architect or the developer to come in. So every developer or every case has to be accompanied by a packet to the neighborhood council. So that packet should have the renderings, and if you don't get them, again, please call me and I'll connect you to the planner.
So that brings me to another point, and then I have one more about this little thing that you're showing up here. Is there are some cases, in fact, there are probably more often cases that don't have the planning packet, and they are an impact on the communities because they are by right projects, like were mentioned. You touched on them earlier, such as you mentioned 50 units requires a site plan, but if you're under 50, it doesn't. But a community may be really impacted with whether it's narrow streets, whether it's just the bulkiness of the project overall. So there are times that leads me to this, because it's the sense that we're trying to remove the public participation or the, and it's not by you, but by those who are wishing to develop. They want the least amount of restrictions upon them. So what I'm sensing, or I want to know, is this step right here, this number one step, how many times do they get to do that with the planning department before it moves in, and maybe it never becomes a true-on director's case?
We have some situations where a builder wants to come into an area and construct. He doesn't really know what he wants to do, but he's looking at properties. We'll sit down with them and explain to them what the regulations are. I'm talking about the ones outside of civic plans, are still in communities, and explain to them what the regulations are, what the community likes in that area, give them that type of feedback. They sometimes will also meet with the council offices and other entities and try to develop a project that's within the bounds of current regulations. Okay? And they do that because they want to, they don't want to ask for discretionary action. They want to build by right, by code. And they can do that. We will never see those projects if they meet all the regulations and are under certain thresholds. It's just the way it is.
Okay. And just the last thing, you had mentioned earlier about different types of environmental cases, such as MNDs and CEs. You had said that CEs are something not to weigh in on because it's what
I
it
didn't
is.
say weigh in. Those are the ones that were determined by the city not to have an impact, and we issue those over the
right. But I have,
and the state of California establishes that criteria for us. So
I understand. I just wanted to point out that there have been cases where communities have found that CEs are too low, and it's not maybe the city's fault. It's maybe the person coming in with the project is really coming in saying it's only this, and then it really turns out to be something much larger and should have had an MMD, for example.
And you can't challenge it.
Yeah.
And in those situations, there's no publication period really, but at that point, then if that happens, when we issue that staff report, we'll have a little line in there saying, we've also recommended this environmental clearance, CE. You can challenge that and say, no, that CE is inappropriate, and explain why. And in a few cases, we have sent them back and said, you know what, here, they've raised issues, concerns. We need to do a full initial study with an MND. Okay. So that does happen. Yes.
Okay. And then I know you didn't answer my question about how many times they get to meet with you, but
we don't have a limit. I mean, I just
I
want
do.
to speak to that. We don't have a limit. We consult with the developers at that point. I mean, I think that's really the most important phase to do that, because that's where they haven't decided on a final program yet, and we have a chance to comment on design. We can comment on really the scope and scale of the neighborhood. I think the early input that Bob spoke of from you guys is so critical for us, because it might not be a matter of you being completely against it or completely for it, but there are often ways that the project can be changed to better, to be more appropriate for the neighborhood, or that we can gain consensus within the community if changes are made. And there's so much more likely that level of success if you have that early input and we can provide early feedback to the applicants to change their projects and result.
And the reason I said I do have a limit is we have a process called case management. And we have people come in, say, and they hypothetically say, I've got this piece of property, what can I do with it? We will have that discussion that Shauna just described, but sometimes they'll leave, work on some drawings, come back, and they want to delve deeper. Oh, what are my street improvements? What are this? What are that?
If it involves other departments, building and safety,
At that point,
engineering.
when they're drilling us with questions at that level, we have a process called case management where they pay a fee and they actually meet with a project manager, case manager, who walks them through and schedules a meeting with the other departments to meet with them so they can get early feedback. That's a separate process, and we push people towards that. So we're not spending so much time on hypotheticals.
That's good to know. Okay, Nina, and I know the other folks had some last questions, but we want to allow some time for you guys to network one-on-one. So Nina?
Okay, SB 1818. The city of Los Angeles apparently goes a little bit farther than what the state requirements are, and they give them a menu of X amount of things to choose from. Now, when you have a project that is going into a community area that has tiny little streets and limited parking, why would you allow them to take parking issue as one of those menus where they don't have to provide adequate parking for something that's under, what do you say, under 50 becomes a by right? But when that large of a development severely impacts a neighborhood with tiny streets and no parking, why would that be allowed to be a menu on their, that they can pick and say, we do not want to provide adequate parking to go with these 48 or 49 units, make it right under a by right, to be a by right?
We address those on a case-by-case basis, but those on-menu items with the parking reduction, that's already been, it's outside of our purview.
That comes from state law.
That's already something that's been decided that it is an equitable balance to reduce parking to increase affordable housing. That decision's been made. We're now, implementation, we're implementing that one. We don't have a say in saying, no, that's a bad policy.
Can you, as a department, go to the city and say this is not working and they need to go to the state? There needs to be a remedy for this. It has to change.
Well, let me pass that to Lisa.
Actually, what we're hearing also is that the city is more lenient than the state.
Yes.
The state is actually a little better at their requirements. So I think that's where we need to have the conversation, is why the leniency on, it's the city's implementation ordinance of SB 1818 that we need to have a conversation with for our communities. That's really what needs to happen, because it really is too lenient.
It's a citywide.
Yeah. So I know, Lisa, you were about to say something. I'm sorry.
No, I'll take a note on that. I mean, I think that's a larger conversation.
It's extremely important.
And just so you know, at a Lank meeting recently, there was a presentation on the general plan updates, and Matthew Glesney from City Planning said he welcomes the opportunity to open up that conversation. So, okay, I know you guys have asked questions before. Do you want to take them really quick? There's two. And then I'll let you guys network. Tony?
I have a real quick one on the packets where it's mentioned that the developer is supposed to send the packets out. Originally, those packets were supposed to be identical to what the window packet was. But increasingly over the years, we have seen that developers are not including they may include the radius map, but they don't include the list of properties that are within that radius map, which is very helpful to us for outreach. And I just want to make that note, and hopefully you can encourage them to make certain that that list of addresses is also included.
Cindy, if I may, I wanted to remind the group about this Public Records Act, and I think some of you have used it before to request information of other city agencies, including the City Planning Department. The Public Records Act is just another tool to make sure that you're kept informed about notices or anything that is relevant to a project in your neighborhood. So when you get your early notification report and you call that planner, and if that project is going to require an M&D, and if you want to be kept up to date, you could ask in writing, per the Public Records Act, I want to receive the notices at this address. Every time a notice goes out on this project, because sometimes you'll get the public hearing notice and you're like, oh my gosh, it's in 10 days, how come I didn't know before, or what have you. So like that, you'll double make sure that you're kept in the loop on the progress of a project in your neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, when does, we just had an issue with one of the projects. When does public safety come into play for this? Because a lot of times we have proven that there's an issue with public safety, and we've shown proof and everything else, and it doesn't seem to take into consideration on this approval.
When we do an analysis, the environmental has a public safety section where we have to say, is this project going to affect fire, police, and a few other items? And we do that analysis for a specific one. I couldn't tell you for that particular one, but we do look at certain police services, fire services, and how they'll be impacted.
That would be it with an MND, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's why it's important to know if there's going to be an M&D published for that project, there's always a public comment period for that M&D. So it's always key to always find that out because you want to submit comments related to environmental concerns during that window as well. It doesn't mean that later on you can't talk about it or make your concerns, revealed to the decision maker. But during that M&D public comment period, you should be sending us comments on, hey, you know what, there is more traffic here. I don't know why you put less than significant impact, or whatever the case may be.
So I want to thank Bob and Jenna. They work hard for the city. And thank you very much for your presentation today. Lisa, thank you. And Heidi, I want to check if you have any announcements for everybody before we
I'm going to be here, so if anybody's new to the group and you just want to make sure that you receive your early notification reports, or if you want to know how to best access any of the planners or maybe other offices, I'm happy to be that bridge that, gets you to an actual person, and we just don't, send you off to a phone number. So I'm going to stick around.
So let's thank them very much for their time. We welcome you to come back. We hope that you will. So thank you.
If you have a comment you want.